There was once a time, not long ago, but ancient in its spirit, when the meaning of femininity was not questioned, but quietly understood in the hush of dawn, in the hush of a mother's embrace, in the presence of a still stream reflecting the moon. Femininity was not shouted into the world, for it did not need to be. It was known in the silence it carried. But in the age of noise and speed, when identity is traded for achievement, many women now stand at the intersection of two opposing winds, one calling them back to the roots of their essence, and the other urging them to ascend in imitation of something they are not. In this confusion, the sacred rhythm of the feminine begins to distort. She is told that to be strong is to abandon softness, that to be powerful is to speak louder, move faster, climb higher. Yet she was never meant to race toward identity. Her power was in being, not in becoming what others have defined as worthy. In stillness the flower opens, not through effort but through alignment with the light. And yet today many daughters are trained not to open but to armor. In boardrooms, in academic corridors, on social stages, they are taught to conquer as men do, to lead as men do, to detach as men have long been praised for doing. But the question arises, if woman becomes a reflection of masculine form, then who holds the balance of the whole? The universe was never built in uniformity. It was made in duality, in harmony, in polarity. The sun does not question its need for the moon. The fire does not resent the presence of water. And yet, we now live in a generation where feminine energy is not merely redefined, but rejected in favor of a hardened ideal. Young girls learn that vulnerability is danger, that emotional availability is weakness, and that being led is a sign of failure. And so, they shed their nurturing instinct like skin and clothe themselves in ideologies that are admired but not rooted in peace. But to walk far away from one's true essence is to enter a forest of mirrors, where every reflection shows achievement but no inner rest. One may gain applause but lose the rhythm of their soul. To understand femininity, one must not observe trends but observe nature. Consider the wind that bends the bamboo. Consider the water that wears down stone. Consider the womb that bears life not through force, but through stillness. Femininity is not a performance. It is presence. It is not about volume. It is about vibration. It is the subtle energy that restores rather than consumes. But in this modern age, women are told to become more visible by imitating masculine ambition. And in the process they forget that their very invisibility is what gives depth to space. They begin to chase, not because they are meant to, but because they are afraid of being left behind. But who told them that slowness was less than speed? Who told them that softness was lesser than sharpness? Who defined worth through productivity rather than presence? These questions are not philosophical luxuries. They are keys to the healing of our time. For when the feminine is lost, the world tips into aggression, into chaos, into disconnection. We see this in rising anxiety, broken homes, empty marriages, and a society where men and women no longer dance. They wrestle. In trying to mirror masculine traits, many women silence the inner voice that says rest, receive, flow, trust, let go. And in this silence a deep fatigue arises. This is not the fatigue of the body, it is the weariness of the soul. The exhaustion of constantly proving, fighting, defending. The sacred feminine was never meant to live in a state of defense. It was designed for communion, for creativity, for healing. When a woman forgets this, she may rise in external ranks but decline in internal harmony. There is a difference between empowerment and displacement. Real empowerment does not require the shedding of the feminine to wear masculine strength. Real empowerment is the remembrance that the feminine is power, just in a different frequency. When a woman reclaims her softness without shame, she becomes magnetic, not demanding, intuitive, not reactive, peaceful, not passive. But we must ask, how did we arrive at a place where softness is misunderstood as submission? It is because we have forgotten the language of wholeness. We have divided strength into visible and invisible forms, and we have elevated only one side, the visible strength, the one that speaks, pushes, commands, is praised. The invisible strength, the one that nurtures, forgives, feels, is dismissed. Yet which of these truly builds a future worth living in? Which of these sustains not only life but meaning? The mother does not only give birth, she gives belonging. The healer does not only mend wounds, she returns the soul to silence. And yet, in the current narrative, these roles are overlooked or sacrificed in the name of success, which is often defined externally. What if success was redefined as alignment? What if the highest achievement was not to conquer, but to cultivate peace within? What if the feminine journey was not upward, but inward, not linear, but cyclical, not about becoming someone, but about returning to who you already are beneath all the masks? In monasteries, we say that when a person walks too fast, their soul cannot keep up. The same is true for the spiritual woman trying to move in a world that praises only movement. She begins to rush toward things she does not need, adopt energies that are foreign to her true nature, and form identities that drain rather than nourish. But no tree bears fruit by shouting into the sky. It bears fruit by deepening its roots, and so must the modern woman ask herself, what am I rooted in? Is she rooted in truth or in trends? Is she grounded in being or floating in appearances? The danger of modern redefinition is not merely personal, it is collective. Because when the feminine is reshaped into masculinity, the masculine loses his polarity too. He becomes confused, unsure whether to lead, to yield, or to withdraw. And thus, relationships break not from conflict, but from energetic distortion. The dance turns to competition, the intimacy becomes negotiation, and love turns into power struggles. But love was never meant to be a contest. It is a current, one that flows when polarity is honored. In every healthy union, the energies of give and receive, of lead and respond, of build and nurture, must exist in balance. Without this, partnerships become transactions, and the sacred is lost in the pursuit of equality confused with sameness. Let us be very clear, this is not a call to return to outdated gender roles or oppressive system. This is not a defense of patriarchy, nor a limitation on potential. Rather, it is a call to presence, a call to remember that equality must never demand the sacrifice of essence. A rose and a pine tree are not equal because they are identical. They are equal because each is fully itself. When a woman feels pressured to act, speak, and move like a man to be respected, she is being asked to betray something ancient within her, and betrayal of the self is the greatest cause of suffering. The path to healing is not rebellion, it is remembrance. To sit with oneself in silence and feel the whispers beneath all societal noise. To feel the yearning not just for success, but for serenity. Not just for respect, but for resonance. When a woman reclaims this, when she learns again to walk barefoot in her soul, she does not need to shout. Her very presence becomes medicine. The world begins to shift, not through force, but through frequency. This is the power of the feminine restored, so the question remains, not just for women, but for the world. Will we continue to ask the river to burn like fire? Will we keep demanding that the moon shine like the sun? Or will we remember that harmony comes not through conformity, but through contrast respected and embraced? The changing definition of femininity need not be a war. It can be a homecoming, a return to essence. A bow to the inner temple, and in this return, perhaps the men too will find their place, not above or beneath, but beside, not in rivalry, but in rhythm, and the world, long fractured by disconnection, will once again learn to dance. There is a path that many walk now, paved with goals, deadlines, titles, and accolades, and it is often called success. Yet few who walk it ask, at what cost does this road ascend? In the modern world, where movement is mistaken for meaning and achievement for fulfillment, many souls, especially women, are taught to pursue career success with an almost sacred devotion. The office becomes the temple, the laptop the altar, and the promotion the ritual reward. Yet underneath the polished surface of empowerment lies a deeper question that is rarely voiced, but often felt in the silence between meetings and the quiet after emails. Am I truly nourished or merely accomplished? The modern woman has been told for decades that to be powerful, she must stand on her own, achieve independently, and desire no one's validation, for dependence has been framed as weakness. She is applauded for her sharpness, her hustle, her assertiveness, her ability to manage like steel. But there is little space left to ask what it feels like to carry a heart that longs to rest, to be held, to love and be loved without pretense or performance. The paradox arises, in gaining the world's praise, has she lost the inner sanctuary of intimacy? In the race toward individual success, relationship health begins to quietly wither, not from neglect that is intentional, but from the exhaustion of having nothing left to give after the day is done. When energy is poured fully into one cup, the others remain dry, not out of malice but out of imbalance. Success in the worldly sense requires a kind of singular focus, a narrowing of attention, an alignment of energy toward measurable results. Yet relationships do not operate in such linearity. They require space, they require unhurried time, they thrive not on efficiency but on presence. And herein lies the quiet conflict, the very traits that make one excel in career: detachment, decisiveness, goal orientation, often disrupt the delicate, non-linear energy that love and connection demand. Relationships ask for surrender, not strategy. They ask for patience, not performance. They ask for vulnerability, not control. And so, when a woman is conditioned to rise by the standards of logic and structure, it becomes difficult to soften into the spaces that require emotional openness and intuitive rhythm. She begins to feel that to love is to lose ground, that to rest in a partner's presence is to fall behind, and that to lean on someone is to risk becoming small. But these are illusions born not of strength, but of fear. Fear that one cannot be both successful and surrendered, both sharp and soft, both powerful and peaceful. Yet the truth is not in choosing one over the other, but in learning the art of rhythm, when to advance and when to yield. Nature teaches this always. The tide does not rise forever, it also recedes. The tree does not grow endlessly upward, it also bends. The sun shines, but the moon heals. So too must the soul alternate between expression and reflection, ambition and affection, doing and being. When the sacred balance is lost, when career consumes the landscape of one's identity, relationships become secondary, often seen as optional accessories rather than spiritual mirrors. Love is scheduled, connection is managed, and emotions are processed like data, not felt like rivers. The heart becomes a ledger checking compatibility, benefits, long-term returns, forgetting that love at its core is not logical but experiential. In this model, intimacy suffers, not because the desire for love is absent, but because the skill of sustaining it becomes foreign. A woman who spends her days leading meetings, making decisions, and commanding presence often finds it difficult to transition into a space where she is not required to prove anything, but simply to be. The body may be present with her partner, but the energy is still in defense mode, still calculating, still operating in a masculine frequency. And the partner, often a man seeking polarity, softness, mutual resonance, feels he is not meeting a mirror, but a wall. He withdraws, she tightens, the cycle begins, and they both wonder why something so desired feels so impossible. This is not a condemnation of ambition, nor a romanticizing of dependency. It is a call to return to the ancient embodied wisdom that does not see success and connection as opposing forces, but as two wings of the same bird. A bird cannot fly with only one wing. To succeed externally but fail internally is to walk in circles, always moving, never arriving. The modern woman, if she is to be whole, must ask herself, who am I when the title is removed? Who am I when no one is watching? Who am I in the silence of night when there are no deals to close, no praises to chase, no image to manage? If the answer is emptiness, then the journey must turn inward, not outward. For no amount of success can fill the absence of soul-aligned connection. Relationships are not decorations. They are mirrors, teachers, sanctuaries. They are the places where the heart learns to breathe, not just perform. And they require a different currency than the one used in the world of work. They require time, presence, forgiveness, listening, humility, laughter, and patience. None of these can be fast-tracked. None of them can be achieved. They must be received. There is a woman within every woman who is tired, not from doing too little, but from doing too much of what drains her essence. She does not need more accolades. She needs more silence. She does not need more victories. She needs more vulnerability. She does not need another certificate. She needs to remember how it feels to be seen, truly seen, not for what she does, but for who she is when all doing ceases. This woman cries sometimes, not because she is weak, but because she has forgotten how to be held. She has armored herself so well that even love cannot find a way in, and she longs, not for rescue, but for rhythm, not for a savior, but for a sanctuary. To build both success and sacred connection, a new form of intelligence is required, not the intelligence of intellect, but the intelligence of energy, when to hold and when to let go, when to speak and when to listen, when to act and when to simply sit, breathe and feel. This intelligence cannot be taught in business school. It must be learned through presence, through pause, through conscious self-reflection. It is found in the spaces between schedules, in the quiet choices that prioritize soul over image. The great paradox is that when a woman truly honors her feminine energy, when she rests in the fullness of her being rather than the pressure of her doing, her relationships not only heal, but her success becomes more sustainable. She no longer burns out, for she is no longer burning herself. She no longer feels alone, for she has stopped abandoning her own needs. She no longer views love as a threat, but as a complement. And in this integration, something extraordinary happens. The men around her begin to rise not in competition, but in complement. Polarity is restored, balance returns, and relationships cease to be battlegrounds. They become breathing grounds, places of life, of laughter, of nourishment, not perfect, but real, not without conflict, but rooted in compassion. For what good is a victory if it is not shared? What good is a full schedule if the heart is empty? What good is a strong voice if it cannot speak the language of the soul? To every woman reading this, you are not asked to choose between being powerful and being loved. You are invited to be both, through balance. Through rhythm, through remembrance. Your career is not your enemy, nor your identity. It is one expression of your soul's journey, but it is not the whole. Make space for the sacred. Honor the relationships that mirror your heart. Be willing to be soft in a world that rewards hardness. Be willing to listen in a world that prizes speaking. Be willing to rest in a world addicted to doing. This is not regression. It is evolution. The evolution of a woman who no longer splits herself in two to succeed, who no longer sacrifices connection to gain credentials, who no longer runs from love but learns how to receive it, and in doing so, she heals not just herself but the world, for a nourished woman becomes a nourishing force. A woman in balance becomes a source of balance, and a heart that knows both success and serenity becomes the lamp from which others remember their own light. In the quiet of a man's heart, beneath the noise of societal expectations and cultural confusion, there remains an ancient instinct, a longing not for conquest, not for domination, but for companionship that balances the world within him. This instinct is subtle, often hidden beneath layers of silence and stoicism, but it is real, primal, and deeply woven into his spirit. The modern man, like the modern woman, finds himself adrift in an era where the natural energies between the masculine and feminine are no longer clearly understood, but instead redefined, challenged, even reversed. In his essence, man was not created to be alone, not merely biologically, but energetically. His strength is meant to be paired with softness, his fire with water, his drive with peace. And yet, in a world that applauds independence above interdependence, he now finds himself meeting not women who seek to harmonize, but women who reflect back his own masculine energy, not as complement, but as competition. She arrives armored, she speaks sharply, she challenges rather than flows, and though her intention may be to be strong, her energy often pushes against rather than dances with his own. And in this moment, the man who desires partnership feels a subtle retreat within himself, not because he fears her strength, but because he no longer recognizes the polarity that draws the masculine to the feminine. It is not a lack of attraction, it is the absence of resonance. To understand this, we must go deeper than gender roles, deeper than surface psychology, deeper even than cultural dialogue. We must look to energy itself. Everything in life is built upon polarity. The universe itself breathes through dualities, yin and yang, night and day, inhale and exhale, sun and moon, push and pull. In every dance of life, harmony is created not through sameness, but through the sacred dance of opposites. Masculine energy in its purest form is direction, focus, containment, provision, stability. It is the riverbank. Feminine energy is movement, creativity, intuition, surrender, nurturing. It is the river. Without the bank, the river floods. Without the river, the bank is dry. But what happens when both the river and the bank begin to behave the same? The flow ceases, the dance collapses, and confusion takes root. This is what many men now feel in the realm of relationships. They are not confused by women. They are confused by the distortion of polarity. When both energies express masculine forms, assertiveness, control, emotional suppression, and strategic independence, there is no magnetism, only resistance. And yet the instinct remains, buried beneath the digital noise and emotional fatigue. The instinct to build, protect, love, and co-create with a woman who meets his strength not with force, but with grace. This is not a call for women to shrink, to silence, or to surrender their dreams. It is a call to remember the forgotten language of energetic truth. A man does not withdraw from a strong woman. He withdraws from a woman who no longer carries the energy of polarity that allows him to feel needed, received, respected, and honored in the unique way the masculine longs to serve. He is not running from her success. He is seeking her essence. And when he cannot find it, when he meets only edge, only resistance, only guardedness, he no longer knows how to stand in his own role. Because the sacred masculine, when met with the sacred feminine, awakens into leadership, presence, and direction. But when met with masculine energy in female form, he begins to question his value. And when his value is questioned, he either fights, submits, or walks away. None of these lead to true partnership. The modern man does not want a subordinate, but neither does he want a rival. He wants a reflection, not of himself, but of the energy that draws him forward, softens his spirit, brings him back into the present moment where he no longer needs to perform, but simply to be. And in that space, the feminine becomes not a threat, but a sanctuary. In a world where women are taught to hustle, perform, achieve, and guard themselves against dependency, the natural rhythm of relational energy is disrupted. Men who have long been told to suppress their emotional selves now meet women who are doing the same. The emotional desert grows wider, the conversations become strategic rather than soulful, The shared moments are filtered through screens and schedules, and slowly the sacredness of partnership erodes. Yet the instinct remains. In his quiet moments, the man dreams of a woman who allows him to protect without condescension, to lead without dominance, to serve without shame. He longs for a partnership where his offering is not seen as oppressive, but as devotional, where his presence is not competed with, but invited, where his role is not dismissed, but honored, not through words, but through the felt experience of energetic harmony, and in return he opens, he provides, not just materially, but emotionally. He listens, he slows down, he stays, for when a man feels needed, not for what he can give, but for who he can be in presence, he roots himself in the soil of that relationship. But when he is made to feel redundant, replaceable, or irrelevant, he will eventually drift, not out of cruelty, but because the polarity that anchors him is no longer alive. There is great misunderstanding in the idea that men fear strong women. It is not strength that is the barrier, it is masculine energy without balance that becomes the block. Strength can come clothed in softness, power can flow through grace, influence can be silent yet deeply felt. But when strength is expressed only through control, only through logic, only through invulnerability, the sacred feminine retreats, and so does the masculine seeking her. A man does not need his partner to be smaller so he can feel big. This is the behavior of a boy. A man is not threatened by a woman's power. He is disoriented when that power no longer resonates with his own in a way that completes rather than competes. And in this disorientation, he searches for understanding. Some numb it, some overcompensate, some disengage entirely, but a few, those willing to look deeply, begin to ask, where is the woman who can meet my strength with her peace, my drive with her receptivity, my silence with her intuition, my presence with her surrender? This is not submission, it is co-creation. This is not hierarchy, it is harmony. For too long, partnership has been defined through roles rather than energies, but roles change, energies endure. What sustains a relationship is not who earns more, who leads more, or who speaks louder. It is how the energies dance. In this dance, both must feel seen, valued, and empowered, not through similarity, but through synergy. The man who remembers his instinct for partnership begins to seek not perfection, but polarity. He seeks not a woman who mirrors his every move, but one who awakens parts of him that the world has silenced. She becomes the place where he can rest his sword, not because he has given up the fight, but because in her presence the war ends. And for her, he becomes the ground she can trust, not because he controls, but because he provides stability through consistency, presence, and love. This is the instinct, deeper than romance, deeper than lust, deeper than social contracts. It is the energy of union, where two forces come together not to dissolve into sameness, but to rise into wholeness. So let the men remember who they are, not through dominance, but through presence, not through suppression, but through strength rooted in heart. And let the women remember who they are, not through mimicry, but through mastery of their own frequency. The world does not need more rivals, it needs more rhythm. And when man and woman begin to honor the energies within them and between them, the instinct for partnership no longer needs to hide. It begins to blossom again. Not as fantasy, but as the future, not as nostalgia, but as the next evolution of human connection. And in that space, the masculine and feminine no longer fear each other. They no longer fight each other. They flow, like river and sky, like wind and fire, like earth and ocean, not to conquer, but to complete. In the vast unfolding of human life, there are moments when the soul seeks not more options, but more meaning. And yet, in this present age, meaning is often mistaken for movement, and depth for display, as if the faster one runs, the more fulfilled one becomes, and the louder one lives, the more significant their existence must be. Yet all things in nature whisper a different wisdom. That which is eternal grows slowly, That which is sacred moves inward, and that which nourishes does not clamor for attention, but reveals itself through silence and stillness. Among the many ancient bonds humanity once held close: family, faith, the land. Perhaps none has been more quietly deconstructed than the idea of marriage, not simply as a legal contract or romantic ideal, but as a sacred passage of partnership, as a commitment not only between two individuals, but between two energies that seek to walk the inward road of life together, through cycles, seasons, shadows, and sunrise. But now the culture speaks a new language, one that raises independence as the highest virtue, glorifies perpetual self-optimization, and teaches the young that to tether oneself to another is to lose freedom, to limit potential, to risk stagnation in a world that idolizes expansion. And so marriage, once a sacred destination on the map of life, becomes optional, if not entirely irrelevant for many, and not because people no longer feel love, but because they no longer trust the structure that was once the vessel for love to be given shape, direction, and endurance. In this new framework, freedom is often defined as the ability to say yes to oneself at all times, to shift course at will, to avoid anything that asks for patience, compromise, or permanence. But when freedom loses its center, it becomes dispersion, not liberation. When freedom is not aligned with purpose, it turns into distraction. And this is the quiet irony of the modern age. In the name of personal choice, many now drift, rootless, connectionless, circling through experiences without ever arriving. Marriage, which once asked two people to slow down, to build something enduring, to grow together instead of apart, now seems to many like a limitation, an obstacle to self-expression. The soil is bypassed in favor of the wind, the hearth abandoned for the thrill of the open road. And yet, the deeper currents of the soul do not evolve with trends. They remain anchored in the longing to be seen, to be witnessed, to be known beyond the surface. And this longing, when denied, creates not joy but fragmentation. For it is not enough to be surrounded by many. It is necessary to be truly held by one, to be seen in our most unguarded state and not be left behind. This is the gift marriage once held at its center. Not perfection, but permanence, not ease, but evolution, not constant happiness, but conscious union. But now, the very idea of staying has become suspect. The new language praises motion: leave if unhappy, quit if challenged, swipe if uncertain. Everything is replaceable, and yet, in this constant cycle of beginning and ending, the human soul begins to starve, not from lack of stimulation, but from lack of sacredness. For sacredness does not multiply with choices, it deepens with commitment, and commitment requires sacrifice, not the sacrifice of joy, but the sacrifice of ego, of pride, of always needing to be right, of always needing to win. Marriage asks us to confront not just the other, but ourselves. It mirrors back to us our patterns, our projections, our unhealed wounds, and because of this, many avoid it. Not because they don't desire love, but because they fear the mirror. They fear the intensity of being known. They fear that settling down means settling for less. But this is a misunderstanding born from the illusion that freedom and love are opposites. In truth, love is the deepest freedom. For in being fully accepted, one is freed from the need to pretend. And in being chosen every day by the same person, one is invited into the greatest spiritual training of all, to remain, to refine, to renew. The modern soul, raised in a culture of constant self-reinvention, often sees marriage as an outdated relic, a thing of the past that restricts future options. But time itself is not linear, it is rhythmic. Just as nature cycles through death and rebirth, so too does the soul crave containers that give life structure. Without structure, life becomes a sea of endless potential, but no direction. In ancient traditions, marriage was not just a personal vow. It was a spiritual training ground, a dojo of the heart, where two people learned how to transform desire into devotion, passion into purpose, and love into lasting light. It was not meant to make us happy all the time. It was meant to make us holy, to cleanse the ego through friction, to reveal our deepest attachments, and to invite us into deeper responsibility. But today, responsibility itself is often viewed with suspicion. We are taught that the highest form of love is self-love, that to depend on another is to regress, that to bind oneself in promise is to betray one's infinite possibilities. But this narrative, though popular, is incomplete. For while solitude can purify the self, it is only in relationship that the self is truly revealed. So what is lost when marriage is diminished? Not just the ceremony, not just the legal union, but the space for transformation that can only arise when two people choose to stay and to see each other fully. The world may offer infinite novelty, but novelty fades. What remains is depth, and depth is not found in options, but in endurance, in staying long enough to see beyond the surface, in loving past the point where it is easy, in showing up when one would rather disappear. This is what marriage was meant to hold, not as an obligation, but as a vessel for the sacred art of human connection. Without it, or something like it, relationships become moments rather than movements, experiences rather than evolutions. And the soul, which longs not just for pleasure but for progression, finds itself trapped in a loop, always beginning, never becoming. There is a reason why spiritual traditions across the world honored long-term partnership. It is not because they were naive or repressive, but because they understood that the soul matures through constancy, that the highest growth does not come from escaping discomfort, but from learning how to move through it with grace. In a marriage, one learns not only how to love another, but how to love oneself in the presence of another. One learns patience, humility, forgiveness, responsibility, surrender, all the qualities the ego resists, but the soul requires. These are not burdens, they are blessings. They are the muscles of the heart, and like any muscle, they do not grow through ease, but through resistance. To bypass this training is to remain spiritually underdeveloped. No matter how successful, beautiful, or admired one may be, the inner life cannot mature on its own. It needs another. It needs friction. It needs reflection. Yet all of this is missed when marriage is reduced to a lifestyle choice, an optional checkbox, or a risk to personal freedom. What many do not see is that in avoiding the depth that marriage offers, they are often choosing a life of repeated surface. The names may change, the cities may shift, the jobs may evolve, but the soul remains in the same place, circling, yearning, aching for the one thing it cannot find in freedom alone, rootedness. We are not trees, but we were meant to root. Not in places, but in people. Not in ownership, but in union. And marriage at its highest is not an institution. It is a spiritual root system, where two souls agree to weather the storms of life together, not perfectly, but faithfully. When this is understood, marriage is no longer seen as a limitation, but as liberation from the wandering that exhausts the spirit. So let us not throw away what is sacred simply because it is difficult. Let us not confuse challenge with oppression, nor independence with isolation. Let us remember that the deepest freedom comes not from avoiding commitment, but from choosing it with full awareness. To marry, not out of social pressure, but out of spiritual readiness, is to enter the temple of life, where the ego is slowly dissolved and the soul begins to shine. And in that sacred container, not just two lives, but generations are transformed. There is a sound that few can hear, though many leave with it. It is not the noise of cities or the chaos of the world, but the echo of one's own aloneness, vibrating softly beneath the surface of every accomplishment, every outward appearance of control, every smile offered at meetings, every polished image curated for the world's eyes. It is the ache that grows not from being by oneself, but from being unknown in a world that seems too busy to truly see, too loud to truly listen, too fast to truly stay. In the age of hyperconnectivity, where voices fill every device and lights glow in every pocket, we have somehow forgotten the very thing that once made us whole, the experience of being held, not in the arms of the crowd, but in the presence of genuine connection. And so, what we now face is not merely a cultural trend or a mental health statistic, but a quiet spiritual famine, a loneliness that hides beneath layers of functionality, beneath the routine of success, beneath the thrill of independence. Particularly among high-achieving women who have mastered the art of competence and carved out lives that appear full, there often lives a secret that in being everything for everyone, she has become very little for herself, that in building her empire, she has forgotten what it feels like to come home, not to a place, but to a presence. And so the loneliness sets in, not all at once, but gradually, like evening light retreating into dusk, subtle yet unstoppable, until one day she wakes up successful, admired, independent, and spiritually starving. This loneliness is not the absence of company, it is the absence of resonance. It is the experience of speaking without being heard, of lying beside someone and still feeling alone, of achieving every goal but missing the joy of sharing it with someone who truly sees you, not for what you do, but for who you are when nothing is performed. It is the ache of the soul, not of the schedule, and it is born not from weakness, but from disconnection from one's essence. In the pursuit of empowerment, many have learned to suppress the vulnerable, relational, receptive aspects of themselves, the parts that once opened them to the possibility of intimacy. Taught to fear dependency, they now fear intimacy itself, mistaking protection for peace and control for strength. And in this fortress of self-sufficiency, the soul slowly begins to freeze. At first, it seems like freedom, to move as you please, to answer to no one, to sleep without interruption. But eventually, the silence becomes heavy, not the silence of rest, but the silence of emotional exile. For what the soul truly desires is not to be untouchable, but to be touched, to be seen in the softness that cannot be monetized, to be known in the stillness that cannot be scheduled, and to be loved not in spite of her vulnerability, but because of it. Loneliness often comes not from solitude, but from disembodiment, from being disconnected from one's own needs, desires, and longings. It arises when one leaves from the mind but forgets the heart, when one masters efficiency but forgets how to feel, when life becomes a series of tasks rather than a movement of presence. Many women today have become so practiced in providing for themselves that they have forgotten how to receive. And in forgetting how to receive, they also forget how to open, how to trust, how to invite another into the sacred space of their inner world. Relationships then become performances or negotiations rather than soul-level communion. And the loneliness deepens, not because people aren't around, but because no one gets in. The walls are high, the heart is guarded, and though love knocks, it cannot enter. The irony is that this self-protective closure, built in the name of empowerment, eventually becomes a prison. The same strength that kept the world out now keeps joy out. The same independence that once felt liberating now begins to feel isolating, and the same image of the complete woman begins to feel like a mask that hides a silent plea for connection. The deeper root of this loneliness is not social, it is energetic. Feminine energy, by its nature, is relational. It seeks to connect, to merge, to nurture, to be mirrored. When that energy is denied, suppressed, or shamed, a woman may rise professionally, but her inner landscape begins to dry up. She may achieve, but she does not bloom. She may gain recognition, but she loses resonance. And over time, this internal drought begins to manifest. Through burnout, through restlessness, through a deep fatigue that sleep cannot cure. The soul begins to whisper, You were not meant to do this alone. Not because she needs rescuing, but because we all need resonance. We all need moments where we can take off the armor, where we can cry without apology, where we can laugh without curation, where we can lean, not because we're incapable, but because we're human. True strength is not measured by how long you can hold yourself up. It is measured by how honestly you can fall into the arms of trust. There is no shame in the longing to be held. There is no weakness in desiring closeness. There is no regression in yearning to build a life with someone who sees you beyond your resume. These are sacred desires woven into the fabric of human experience. To deny them is not strength, it is severance. Severance from the self, from the collective human rhythm, from the ancient truth that we are wired not just to survive, but to connect. The modern path must not force a woman to choose between success and soul, between achievement and attachment, between freedom and love. The real evolution is integration, to allow space for solitude and connection, for ambition and intimacy, for sovereignty and surrender. Loneliness ends not when someone arrives, but when we become available to be seen. And to be seen, we must be willing to remove the masks, not just with others, but with ourselves. So the path begins in stillness, to sit with the ache instead of avoiding it, to breathe into the spaces where you feel empty, to ask, what part of me have I silenced in the name of strength? To inquire, when did I begin to fear needing others? And to reflect, what would it feel like to be truly known? Not just in beauty, but in grief. Not just in competence, but in confusion. Not just in light, but in shadow. Because when we allow ourselves to be known in all of it, we open the door to love that is not based on performance, but presence. And this kind of love is not just romantic, it is nourishing. It is the love of deep friendship, of spiritual partnership, of community, of sacred reflection. And when it returns, loneliness does not disappear, it transforms. It becomes solitude, not exile, quiet, not silence, stillness, not sadness. The epidemic of loneliness will not be healed by dating apps or digital platforms, nor by working harder or achieving more. It will be healed when the soul is honored again, when presence is valued over productivity, when being is celebrated alongside doing, when connection is restored as a spiritual necessity, not a luxury. It will be healed when both men and women are encouraged not only to build but to bond, not only to lead but to listen, not only to speak but to sit together in the sacredness of silence. Let the modern woman know, you are not failing by wanting more than your success. You are not weak for desiring arms to rest in. You are not broken for yearning for a connection that sees beyond your surface. This is your soul speaking, and it is wise, and it is holy. There is a silence within every woman that speaks louder than her words, a sacred rhythm, deep and ancient, that remembers what the world has forgotten, that recalls the time before time, when feminine energy flowed not with resistance but with reverence, not in imitation of the masculine, but in full trust of its own divine current. And though the modern world has praised her accomplishments, celebrated her rise, and rewarded her ability to conquer, there remains an unease soft, persistent, like water wearing away stone, not because she has risen too far, but because she has risen in a way that required her to forget the very essence of what made her whole, her polarity, her feminine frequency, her inner temple of rest, intuition, softness, emotional wisdom, grace and being. In her quest to match a world built on masculine energy, of striving, competing, achieving, controlling, she has slowly, silently, drifted from the very source that could restore her, heal her, and return her to alignment with the sacred. The modern woman, told to lean in, to take charge, to never need anyone, has been applauded for becoming unshakable. But what if her true power was never in being untouchable, but in being unafraid to feel deeply, to open fully, to trust again, to surrender not in weakness, but in the strength that knows how to yield without losing self, to receive without shame, and to love without fear of disappearing. To reclaim feminine polarity is not to go backward. It is to return to truth. It is not about roles, but resonance. Not about submission, but surrender. Not about silence, but soul. It is remembering that the moon does not apologize for her softness, that the ocean does not resist its tides, that the flower does not bloom in haste or fear. Feminine energy is the field from which all life emerges. It is receptive but not passive, nurturing but not powerless, flowing but not formless. It is not the absence of strength, it is the presence of sacredness. And yet, in today's paradigm, to embody this energy is often mocked or misunderstood. Softness is seen as fragility, receptivity as dependence, emotionality as drama. But what has truly been lost is the wisdom of energy itself. For polarity is not preference, it is principle. It is the magnetism between opposites that creates harmony in nature, music, movement, and relationship. Without it, everything collapses into sameness, and from sameness comes friction, not fusion. The more a woman is forced to embody the masculine, the more polarity dissolves and the more connection becomes impossible, not because love isn't present, but because energy cannot align. And so relationships begin to fail, not from lack of desire, but from energetic confusion. The return to feminine polarity is not about pleasing others. It is about coming home to oneself. It is about slowing down long enough to feel again, to listen again, to breathe again. It is the decision to no longer define value by output, nor power by control. It is about saying yes to the deeper movements of the soul that have long been silenced by productivity. In this remembrance, the feminine stops chasing, stops proving, stops performing. She chooses instead to radiate. She becomes magnetic not by doing more, but by being more present, more grounded, more attuned to her own intuition. And in that being, she begins to attract rather than pursue. This is not manipulation. It is magnetism. The universe itself operates this way. The sun does not go looking for the planets. They revolve because of its stillness, its pull, its gravity. When a woman reclaims her polarity, she becomes like the sun, still, powerful, radiant, and irresistible, not through assertion, but through alignment. Many women, having grown tired of hardness, begin to ask quietly, is there another way? Tired of burnout, tired of pretending, tired of sleeping beside lovers but never feeling met, they begin to long not for another success, but for sanctuary. And in this longing begins the awakening. She starts to remember what it means to be safe in her own body, to trust her own cycles, to honor her intuition, to speak not from strategy, but from sincerity. She begins to see that in her softness is strength, and in her surrender is power. She no longer needs to dominate a room to be seen. She enters and her presence speaks. She no longer competes with men. She complements them. Not because she shrinks, but because she expands into her true frequency. In doing so, she invites the masculine into its highest form, not through force, but through invitation. A woman in her feminine draws out the king in a man, not by demanding, but by embodying. And the men who meet her there do not feel threatened. They feel honored, for polarity does not diminish, it dignifies. It allows both to stand in their fullness. To reclaim feminine polarity is also to grieve. To grieve the years spent hardened, to grieve the mask worn too long, to grieve the intimacy missed because softness felt unsafe, to grieve the connection sabotaged by control, the joy dimmed by over-efforting, the laughter stifled by tension. But this grief is sacred. It is the soil from which rebirth begins. And once this mourning has moved through her, she begins to dance again. Not just in the world, but within herself. She moves differently. She speaks differently. She no longer lives from the neck up. She returns to her body, her womb, her breath. She dresses not to attract, but to express. She loves not to earn, but to share. She no longer sees surrender as defeat, but as the doorway to deeper trust. And in trusting herself, she creates the space for others to trust her. This is the feminine way, not of pushing, but of pulling life toward her through authenticity, elegance, and emotional integrity. This path is not easy. It goes against the grain of modern conditioning. It requires unlearning decades of narratives that said, be less emotional, never depend on anyone, prove your worth through work. But if she dares to walk it, if she dares to reclaim the rhythm that has always been hers, she will discover that everything she was chasing was already waiting in her return. The love, the peace, the connection. The wholeness, not because she became someone new, but because she finally remembered who she was before the world told her otherwise. And in that remembrance, she becomes a lighthouse, not just for men, but for other women who are weary of performing strength and are now ready to embody truth. She becomes a space where the sacred feminine can rise again, not as trend but as timeless truth, and the world begins to shift. Relationships heal, men soften without losing strength, women shine without hardening. Children grow up seeing polarity not as power struggle, but as poetry. The collective energy rebalances, not through policies, but through presence. Because when enough women remember, the earth remembers. And when the earth remembers, harmony returns. One breath, one being, one brave return at a time.